My brother is getting divorced, and I think he deserves it. When my brother told us his wife had finally left him, my mother started crying, my father started swearing, and all I could think was, it took her long enough. I know that sounds cruel. I know how ugly it is to say something like that about your own brother when his marriage is collapsing and his whole life is splitting in two. If you heard him tell it, you would think he was some poor abandoned man who worked hard, loved his family, and got repaid with coldness and betrayal. If you heard my parents tell it, you would think he married a woman who slowly turned sharp and distant and impossible to please, and then one day decided vows meant nothing. But I was there for too much of it. Not every minute, not every fight behind closed doors, not every text message or every insult whispered in the kitchen after guests had left. Still, I saw enough over the years to know that if my brother is getting divorced, it is not some tragedy that fell on him out of a clear blue sky. It is a consequence. It is a bill finally arriving. It is a house rotting from the inside until the front door at last caves in. I am 34, my name is Marta, and my brother Tomas is 39. We grew up in Dansk, in one of those families that looks better from the outside than it feels from the inside. My father, Pyotr, was the kind of man who believed volume was the same thing as authority. My mother, Elijah, believed peace was something women manufactured for men and children, even if it meant swallowing every honest thought before it could become trouble. Tomas was the firstborn, the son, the bright one, the funny one, the one my mother still describes as sensitive, when what she means is impossible to correct without a scene. People loved him when we were younger. He had that talent. He could walk into a room and make 3 people laugh in under a minute. Teachers said he was charming. Aunties pinched his cheek and told him he would break hearts one day. He knew how to apologize without changing. That is a very dangerous talent in a handsome little boy because adults keep mistaking performance for goodness. I was younger by 5 years, quiet, easier, the kind of child who made other people's lives simpler, which in a family like mine meant I was mostly treated as furniture unless I became inconvenient. Tomas learned early that if he smiled, shrugged, and made a joke, he could slide out of almost anything. If I cried because he broke something of mine, my mother would say, "Marta, don't be dramatic, he didn't mean it." If I told my father Tomas had lied and blamed me, my father would say, "You are siblings, stop keeping score." But children do keep score, especially the quiet ones. I still remember one winter afternoon when I was maybe 10 and Tomas was 15. I had this stupid little music box from Sopot that our grandmother had bought me, painted blue with tiny silver stars. It played a scratchy tune, and I loved it with the kind of devotion only children can have for ugly, precious objects. Tomas took it into his room because one of his friends, Kamel, was over and they were making fun of girly junk. I heard it crash. When I ran in, the lid had snapped clean off. Tomas looked right at me, not guilty, not sorry, just irritated that I was there. Then my father came upstairs because of the noise, and before I could say a word, Tomas sighed and said, "She keeps barging in and grabbing things." I told her to stop. I looked at him, stunned, because the lie was so casual. My father barely glanced at the broken music box before turning on me. My mother later came into my room, sat on the bed, and said, "You know your brother has a temper. Why provoke him?" That was the shape of our home. Tomas exploded, and then everyone rearranged themselves around the blast zone and called it family. By the time he was in his 20s, he had polished himself into the sort of man people admire until they live with him. He moved to Krakow after university and got into sales, then account management, then consulting, then some other vague office job that always sounded more impressive in his own mouth than it did to anyone else listening carefully. He liked expensive shoes, dark coats, whiskey he could not actually afford, and talking about ambition as if ambition itself were a kind of virtue independent of what it made you do. He was always on the verge of something bigger. He had that kind of life, lots of presentation, not much foundation. Then he met Amelia. I can still remember the first time I saw her. It was Christmas in Dansk, and Tomas brought her home with that particular expression men get when they want their family to be impressed by what they have acquired. Amelia was from Wroclaw, a year younger than him, with dark hair she kept tucked behind one ear, and a calm voice that somehow made everyone else speak more gently around her. She worked in museum administration then, later in cultural project management, and she had this grounded energy that made our house feel cleaner just because she was standing in it. She brought my mother handmade ginger biscuits in a tin with a ribbon around it and asked my father questions about his work, even though nobody ever asked my father questions about anything except football. Within 2 hours, my mother adored her. I did too, if I am honest. Not in some dramatic instant sister way. It was more that I noticed how sincere she was. She listened fully. She laughed at Thomas, but not in that worshipful way some women laughed at him. She seemed to find him entertaining and exhausting in equal measure, which at the time I took as a good sign. I thought maybe she saw him clearly enough not to be swallowed by him. There were red flags even then, but early love makes everyone look through lace curtains. He interrupted her constantly. He corrected tiny details of stories she told, even when the corrections changed nothing. He turned ordinary things into little competitions, like who had driven farther that day, or who knew more about wine, or which city had better culture. It was never enough for him to just share space with someone competent. He had to come out slightly above them. At one point that Christmas, Emilia was helping my mother in the kitchen, and Tomas walked in, leaned against the doorway, and said, smiling, "Don't let her fool you, she only cooks when there's an audience." He said it like a joke. Everyone laughed, including Emilia, but I saw the pause before she smiled. It was tiny. Most people would have missed it. I did not, because I had spent my whole life learning the difference between laughter and adjustment. After they got engaged, I saw more of them. I was living in Warsaw by then, working long hours, and trying not to turn into either of my parents, but I came down to Krakow a few times to help with wedding bits and to visit. That was when I started to understand the full shape of their relationship. Amelia carried everything invisible. She remembered birthdays, organized paperwork, compared venues, dealt with caterers, found a tailor when Tomas forgot his fitting, booked trains for his grandmother, checked hotel rooms for out-of-town relatives, and still somehow had a full-time job. Tomas, meanwhile, specialized in high-level decisions, which mostly meant turning up at the end of other people's work and acting as if taste were labor. He would reject flowers after Amelia had spent 3 evenings sourcing them. He would complain about menu options after refusing to attend the tasting. He would announce that something felt cheap without having once looked at a budget spreadsheet. I remember one evening in particular. We were at their flat in Krakow, and invitations were spread all over the table. Amelia had dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. Tomas came home late, loosened his tie, looked at the seating plan, and said, "Why is Uncle Rizzard near the front? He bores everyone. Put him farther back." Amelia said very calmly, "Your mother insisted because he is still offended about not being asked to be godfather to you 20 years ago." Tomas laughed and poured himself wine, then fixed it without making her upset. She stared at him for a second and said, "That is what I have been doing with everything?" He did not hear the warning in that. Or maybe he did and chose not to. He just smiled and said, "You're better at this stuff than I am." That sentence sounds complimentary if you do not know the type. In reality, it means, I will benefit from your competence and resent you for having it. The wedding itself was beautiful. Of course it was. Amelia made beauty out of pressure the way some people make soup out of scraps. They got married near Krakow in a small church with pale stone walls and had the reception in an old manor house outside the city. The band was good, the food was endless. My mother cried, my father got drunk enough to hug people he normally disliked, and Tomas spent the whole night acting like a man who had personally engineered a flawless event by existing in the center of it. At around 1 in the morning, I found Amelia in a side corridor with her shoes off, her forehead resting against the wallpaper. I asked if she was all right. She laughed, but it came out thin. She said, "If one more person asks me where the cigarettes are, I am going to walk into the Vistula and let your brother explain that to everyone." I laughed too, because that is what women do when the truth appears dressed as a joke. For the first couple of years of their marriage, the problems were easy for outsiders to minimize. He forgot things. He was selfish with time. He was messy and expected praise for doing half a task. He had opinions about chores he did not do. He spent too much money on himself and then lectured Amelia about financial discipline when she bought something practical. If she made dinner, he would suggest a better way she could have seasoned it. If she planned a weekend away, he would act inconvenienced by the itinerary until they arrived, then post photos everywhere as if he had arranged it. He had a gift for making her work invisible, and her reactions looked disproportionate. That was the pattern that took me years to put proper words to. Tomas never needed to be the obvious villain. He did something much more effective. He created conditions where Emilia was always tired, always disappointed, always 1 degree more burdened than she had anticipated. And then when she finally snapped, he would look at her with this wounded astonishment and say, "Why are you making such a big thing out of this?" One Easter in Dansk, he caused an entire scene because Emilia bought the wrong smoked fish for my father, not because my father cared. My father would have eaten cardboard if there was horseradish on it, but Tomas wanted to perform expertise. He stood in our mother's kitchen, holding the packet as if it were a dead rat, and said, "You know he likes the one from the old market stall. Why would you buy this supermarket rubbish?" Emilia, who had taken the train with 2 bags, helped my mother cook for 10 people, and remembered everyone's stupid preferences, said, "Because I was the only one buying anything." He smiled that smile I hate more than anger and said, "There's no need to be defensive." I said, before I could stop myself, "There's also no need for you to act like she poisoned him." The room went quiet. My mother gave me the look she used whenever I threatened the family religion of pretending. Tomas raised his eyebrows as if I had embarrassed myself. Emilia changed the subject within seconds, because that is another thing women married to men like my brother learned to do: move the furniture before anyone notices the fire. She and I got closer over the years, though never in the dramatic confessional way people imagine. There was no one big night where she sat me down and told me everything. It was smaller, sadder than that. It was messages sent after family gatherings saying, "Thank you for saying something." It was coffee after work in Warsaw when she happened to be in town for a conference, and she would look exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. It was me asking how she was, and her saying, "Fine, just busy," and then after a pause, "I feel like I am becoming a less kind person." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was true, but because it told me what living with Tomas was doing to her. He was eroding her self-image. He had a way of pushing people until they became a version of themselves they did not recognize, then pointing at the damage like proof that they had always been flawed. When Helena was born, I hoped things might change. That was probably naive, but people always hope children will perform miracles on marriages that are already quietly bleeding out. Helena was born in late October, tiny and furious and beautiful, with Emilia's eyes and Tomas's mouth. For about 3 weeks, Tomas played fatherhood like a role he had been waiting to audition for. He carried the baby in cafes and accepted congratulations with solemn pride. He posted soft black and white photos with captions about love and purpose. He spoke about our little team. Then the novelty became routine, and routine was never where Tomas shone. Emilia was recovering, breastfeeding, barely sleeping, and still somehow managing their entire household. Tomas would say he was helping if he held Helena for 20 minutes while also scrolling on his phone. He complained about being tired after uninterrupted nights because the baby's crying had kept him up emotionally. Once, when Helena was maybe 2 months old, I visited them in Krakow and found her crying quietly in the bathroom while the tap ran. I asked what happened. She said, "Nothing. I'm just tired." I said, "Mila." That was what I called her sometimes, shortened from Emilia, because she had once told me her grandmother used it. She leaned back against the sink and finally said, "He said I'm obsessed with the baby, and I never ask how his day was anymore." I actually laughed because it was so grotesque I did not know what else to do. Then I saw her face and realized she was not telling me a ridiculous story. She was telling me the atmosphere of her life. I asked where he was. She said, taking a walk to clear his head. There she was, leaking milk through her shirt, stitched, sleep-starved, with a baby in the next room, and my brother had gone out to recover from not being emotionally prioritized. I wanted to scream. Instead, I made tea because women in my family had all inherited the same pathetic emergency reflex: boil water when the building is collapsing. Things worsened after that, not all at once, but steadily enough that every visit felt like seeing a crack widen in a familiar wall. Tomas started speaking to Emilia with a casual contempt that shocked me by how normalized it became. He would call her tense, humorless, impossible to please. He would describe himself as walking on eggshells when in reality everyone else walked around his moods like bomb disposal experts. If Helena spilled something, he would sigh as if Emilia had personally engineered it. If dinner was late, it was because Emilia couldn't organize. If the flat was messy, it was because she was letting standards slip, as if he were a guest reviewing a hotel rather than one of the two adults making the mess. My parents, God help them, mostly absorbed his version. Not completely. I do not want to paint them as monsters. My mother saw more than she admitted. My father occasionally told Tomas not to be rude, but both of them came from that old poisonous school of marriage where a man's unpleasantness is treated like weather and a woman's resentment is treated like a failure of maintenance. When Amelia returned to work, Tomas suddenly became very interested in talking about balance, which is a word many men use when they want women to continue doing everything while sounding modern. He said Helena needed more structure, by which he meant Amelia should rearrange her schedule. He said family life had become too logistical, by which he meant he did not enjoy being expected to notice his own child's appointments. He said intimacy had changed, which, translated from Tomas into human language, meant his wife was overworked, underappreciated, still angry, and no longer able to fake enthusiasm to keep the peace. Then came the miscarriage. I do not know whether I should even include that, except it explains something essential. Helena was 4 when Amelia got pregnant again. It was early, only a few weeks, and they had not told many people yet. I knew because Amelia called me from a car park outside a clinic in Krakow. Her voice so flat it scared me. She had started bleeding at work. Tomas had picked her up, but instead of staying with her, he left after the doctor confirmed the pregnancy was not viable because he had, an important client dinner. And there was nothing to do anyway. There are moments in life after which you do not see someone in shades anymore. Everything goes brutally clear. I drove down 2 days later. Amelia looked pale and emptied out. Tomas, when I arrived, greeted me at the door with an expression of martyrdom and said, "It's been hard on both of us." Both of us. I think I hated him a little in that instant. Not the abstract family kind of anger that cools with sleep. I mean the hard, clean hatred that comes when another person's selfishness stands exposed in a room and still expects sympathy. That evening, after Helena was asleep, Tomas opened a bottle of wine and started talking about how grief was affecting their connection. He did this in front of Amelia, as if she were an HR representative attending a performance review. He said he felt shut out. He said she was blaming him unfairly for not knowing how to handle emotions the same way. Amelia sat there with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. She looked less angry than absent, like a person leaving herself by degrees. After he went to shower, I said, "Why are you with him?" She did not answer immediately. Then she said, "Because leaving a man like this is harder than staying with him until you stop hoping he will notice what he is doing." That is one of the saddest things anyone has ever said to me. Around that time, I started hearing about Clara, not from gossip, from Tomas himself, which somehow made it more obscene. Clara was a colleague from his new job, younger than him, very sharp, very ambitious, very easy to talk to. He brought her up too often and with too much brightness. If Amelia disagreed with him about work-life balance, Tomas would say Clara understood how demanding professional environments were. If Amelia thought he was neglecting family plans, he would mention that Clara's husband never policed her social calendar. It was not technically an affair then, at least not one he would admit to, but it had all the structure of one: intimacy, outsourced admiration cultivated elsewhere, comparison imported back into the marriage like poison. Amelia knew. Women always know before men think they know. One night she called me after midnight. I was in bed in Warsaw, half asleep, and when I saw her name, I sat straight up. She did not cry. Amelia almost never cried in front of other people. She just said, "I checked his phone." I waited. She said, "I know I shouldn't have." I said, "What did you find?" She gave this short, unbelieving laugh. Nothing explicit enough for a courtroom, enough for reality. According to her, the messages were the kind cowards write when they want the emotional benefits of infidelity with plausible deniability. Tomas telling Clara she was the only one who really got him. Clara calling him brilliant, misunderstood, trapped with responsibilities no one appreciated. Late night messages after arguments at home. Complaints about Amelia described as if he were an overburdened saint. Photos from work trips sent separately, private jokes, a constant thread of flirtation that would look innocent only to someone determined not to see. When Amelia confronted him, he apparently turned it around within minutes. He called her paranoid. He said she had violated his privacy. He said the real issue was that she was so suspicious she had created an emotional climate where he could not even have friendships. Then, when she refused to apologize, he slept in the guest room and told my mother the next day that Amelia was becoming unstable. That was when the family campaign really started, though nobody named it that. My mother began saying Amelia seemed worn out, in that tone people use when they want mental fragility to explain away someone else's legitimate anger. My father said Tomas should not be texting another woman that much, but also Amelia should calm down before she pushes him away. Even my Aunt Danuta, who had been cheated on by her own husband and still acted as if men's faithlessness were some natural resource Europe was built on, said marriages go through phases. I said almost nothing. That is one of the things I am least proud of. People love to imagine that if they saw abuse or cruelty or manipulation, they would stand up and deliver one perfect speech that changed everything. In reality, families are built like old cities. There are tunnels underneath everything. Habits, roles, fears. If you challenge one lie, 10 older lies come rattling down with it. I had spent my entire life being taught that truth was less important than stability. So I picked at the edges. I defended Amelia in moments. I told Tomas when he was being an ass. I told my mother she was infantilizing him. But I did not detonate the whole rotten architecture. I wish now that I had. The final year of their marriage was awful to watch, because the mask started slipping in public. At Helena's 6th birthday in Krakow, Tomas arrived 40 minutes late because he had gone to pick up one thing, and then decided to stop for drinks with colleagues. Children were already eating cake when he burst in with too much cologne and a bright artificial mood. Amelia's face did that thing I had seen more and more often by then, a kind of total stillness that meant she had passed through anger into emotional triage. Later, while Helena was opening presents, Tomas made some comment about how at least this year Amelia had remembered not to invite half of Krakow, because the previous year had apparently been too chaotic. Amelia quietly said, "There were 9 children." He shrugged and said, "And 20 adults you can never say no to." I watched her press her lips together. She kept smiling for Helena kneeling beside her, helping unwrap books and paint sets, thanking people, taking photos. That woman could have taught master classes in functioning while bleeding. After most guests left, I was in the kitchen with Amelia loading plates into the dishwasher when I heard Tomas in the hall talking to his friend Paul. He did not know I could hear. He said, "Honestly, if I'd known marriage was just project management and criticism, I'd have stayed single." Paul laughed uncertainly. Then Tomas added, "She wasn't always like this. She used to be light." I looked at Amelia. She had gone completely still with the plate in her hand. Not crying, not dramatic, just still. Then she put the plate down very carefully and said, almost to herself, "I used to be rested." That line has never left me. A few months later came the weekend in Zakopane that finally blew everything open. My parents had rented a chalet for a family trip. Nothing grand. Just a few days in the mountains because my mother wanted everyone together before Christmas schedules took over. I nearly did not go because work was a nightmare, but I am glad now that I did. Not because it was pleasant, because there are things I might still have doubted if I had not seen them with my own eyes. From the first evening, Tomas was foul, not loud, not drunkenly theatrical, just simmering. He kept checking his phone. He wandered outside to take calls. He snapped at Helena for spilling cocoa. He told Amelia she had packed the wrong boots for him, which was absurd because he was a grown man with hands and a suitcase. At dinner, my mother made some soft, useless comment about everyone needing rest, and Tomas said, "Maybe some people need to stop micromanaging everything." Amelia said, very quietly, "Nobody is micromanaging you. We are asking you to tell us whether you will be here for breakfast or vanish to answer messages." He smiled that cold smile. "I'm sorry my career hasn't frozen because we rented a chalet." The next morning, Helena wanted everyone to go on a short walk in the snow. Tomas said he had to take a work call. Amelia said he could at least tell Helena that himself. He said, "For God's sake, stop using her as emotional blackmail." I was standing in the corridor when he said it. So was my father. So was my mother. Helena heard. That little girl looked up from trying to zip her coat, confused in the way children get when adult cruelty enters the room and they do not yet have words for it. Amelia turned white. She told Helena to go show Babsia her mittens. When the child left, Amelia said, "Do not speak like that in front of her again." Tomas stepped closer, not shouting, worse, controlled. He said, "Then stop provoking scenes." Amelia said, "You create them and then blame everyone else for reacting." He laughed in her face. I wish I could say that was the moment everyone finally understood. It was not. My mother started crying. My father barked at both of them to calm down. Family systems are remarkable that way. Even when one person is plainly doing the damage, everyone rushes to preserve the illusion of equal responsibility. But later that night, after too much mulled wine and too many silences, the real disaster happened. I woke up around 1 in the morning because I heard voices downstairs, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. I came down halfway and saw Tomas and Amelia in the entry hall. He had his coat half on. She was holding his phone. He hissed, "Give me that." She said, "Tell me who AITA Hotel is." It took me a second to understand. Then I did. He had saved Clara under another name. He looked straight at her and said, "You are insane." She laughed, but it sounded broken. "She sent you a heart and asked if you made it out yet." He moved toward her. I came down the last steps then, hard enough that both of them looked at me. I said his name. Just that. Tomas. A warning. He did not hit her, I want to be precise. But he grabbed her wrist hard enough that she dropped the phone, and for a second there was something in his face so ugly and stripped down that I felt 15 again, standing over a broken music box while adults prepared to call it a misunderstanding. I said, "Take your hand off her." He did, immediately, because witnesses change men like him. Then he did something even more disgusting than if he had shouted. He straightened his sleeve and said, "She's drunk." Amelia looked at me and said, with terrifying calm, "No, I'm finished." The next morning they acted normal for Helena's sake, but the air in that chalet felt like after a landslide. Tomas tried twice to get Amelia alone. She refused. My mother kept hovering, making tea nobody drank. My father took long walks and returned red-faced and mute. I drove back to Warsaw with a migraine and the feeling that something irreversible had finally begun. 2 weeks later, Amelia left. Not dramatically. No smashed plates, no police, no midnight escape in slippers. She found a rental in Krakow through a colleague, packed essentials while Tomas was at work, took Helena, and left an envelope on the kitchen table with practical details about nursery pickup, legal representation, and contact boundaries. That is the kind of woman she was. Even at the end, she did administration for the apocalypse. Tomas called me that night. He sounded outraged rather than heartbroken. That told me everything. He said, "She's taken Helena and she's trying to make me look dangerous." I asked, "Did she say you were dangerous?" He said, "That's not the point." Which, in Tomas' language, usually meant yes, that was exactly the point. He launched into a rant about manipulation, parental alienation, emotional cruelty, her vendetta over harmless messages, her refusal to work on the marriage, her coldness, her mental state. I listened for a while, maybe out of habit, maybe out of morbid curiosity. Then he said, "I need you to be honest with Mom and Dad that she's been spiraling for a long time." And there it was. Recruitment. He did not want comfort. He wanted witnesses for his version. I asked him, "Do you mean the version where you emotionally cheated, lied, humiliated her, and grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks?" There was a silence so complete I could hear him breathing. Then he said, very softly, "So she's been talking?" I said, "I've had eyes for years." He exploded then. He called Amelia poisonous, said she had turned me against him, said I was jealous of him since childhood, which would have been laughable if it were not so predictable. Men like Tomas always reach for old scripts when new ones fail. I let him talk until he called Amelia a bad mother. That was when I hung up. My mother called the next morning in tears. She asked if I knew anything. I said yes. She asked if Amelia had really left because of messages and on Rowan Zakopane. I said no, she left because of years. My mother got quiet and then said, "You know how your brother can be, but divorce is so final?" That sentence broke something in me. I said, "Mum, that is exactly the problem. Everyone knows how he can be, and everyone says it like weather, like she was supposed to keep living under it because leaving would be impolite." She cried harder after that. I felt awful and relieved at the same time, which I think is one of the most miserable emotional combinations available to a person. The weeks after the separation were ugly in the slow bureaucratic way that modern heartbreak often is. Solicitors, schedules, bank statements, arguments about Helena's routine. My brother kept trying to position himself as the wronged party. He told relatives Amelia was punishing him for being emotionally open with a colleague. He told friends she was unstable after the miscarriage. He told my parents she was rewriting history. He told me in one of his calmer moments that marriage is complicated and outsiders never know what goes on. That one almost made me laugh because suddenly he was very interested in privacy after years of staging his own innocence like a theater production. I saw Amelia a month later in a cafe near Planty in Krakow. She looked thinner, but lighter somehow, not happy. Nobody in the middle of a divorce with a child is happy, but lighter, like a woman who had set down a bag she had carried so long she forgot it was optional. We talked for nearly 3 hours. About Helena, mostly. About logistics. About lawyers. About whether it was wrong to feel peaceful and devastated at the same time. At one point, I apologized. Not in some huge dramatic way. I just said, I should have done more. She looked at me for a long moment and then said, You were the only person in his family who ever made me feel less crazy. I almost cried then. What a terrible, tiny thing to have offered, and yet how necessary it had been. I asked her why she stayed as long as she did. Not because I judged her, because I truly wanted to understand the mechanics of hope in bad marriages. She stirred her coffee and said, Because he was never awful all the time. Because every time I got close to leaving, he would become the man I met again for 3 weeks. Because I kept thinking if I explained it better, or loved him more carefully, or made life less stressful, he would finally see me instead of seeing what I was useful for. And because once you have built a home with someone, admitting it is breaking feels like confessing you have been translating the same lie for years. I think about that line often too. My parents are still not fully honest about Tomas. They are closer than they used to be, but not honest. My father now says things like, he handled it badly, which is rich understatement from a man who watched his son become a selfish, manipulative husband and mostly responded by asking for quieter dinners. My mother alternates between worrying about Helena and worrying that Tomas is lonely, as if loneliness has not been his most carefully cultivated weapon for years, something he uses to pull women back toward him whenever accountability gets too close. As for Tomas, he goes through phases. Some weeks he is furious and talks about court and fairness and men's rights and how family law is biased. Some weeks he is wounded and introspective and says he knows he made mistakes, but always in that vague performative way that avoids naming actual behavior. Some weeks he tries to charm everyone again. He sends thoughtful gifts to my parents. He posts tasteful photographs from solo weekends in the Tatra Mountains with captions about rebuilding. He tells people he is focused on being the best father he can be. Then he forgets Helena's school concert because he is on a date in Wroclaw. That is the thing about consequences. They arrive, but they do not automatically produce character. The reason I think he deserves this divorce is not that I think divorce is something to celebrate. I do not. It is awful, especially when a child is involved. Helena did not deserve any of this. Amelia certainly did not. Even Tomas, if I could somehow divide him into the frightened boy and the selfish man, probably did not deserve the family culture that taught him he could wound people and still be treated as the center of every room. But he does deserve to lose the marriage he treated like a service. He does deserve the shock of discovering that another human being is not an emotional support structure with paperwork. He does deserve the unbearable humiliation of being seen accurately after years of surviving on soft focus and family excuses. Most of all, he deserves the fact that Amelia stopped loving him in the active, laboring way that had kept his life running. People here deserves it and imagine revenge. I do not mean revenge. I mean consequence. I mean proportion. I mean that when a person spends years turning love into exhaustion, they should not be stunned when the exhausted person finally walks out. What eats at me sometimes is not whether Tomas deserves this. It is whether I was cowardly for understanding him too well and still not burning the lie down sooner. I knew who he was before Amelia married him. Not every detail, not every future cruelty, but the structure was there. I knew how he bent reality to preserve himself. I knew how he made women responsible for his moods. I knew how he could wound someone and then narrate their pain as aggression toward him. And still, when she joined our family, I mostly hoped she would be strong enough to survive what we had all adjusted ourselves around. That shame is mine. I carry it. The last time Tomas and I had a real conversation about the divorce, we were in Dansk at my parents' flat. Helena was with Emilia. My mother had gone to Mass and my father was in the garage pretending to fix something because he cannot tolerate emotional tension without a screwdriver in hand. Tomas was standing by the window looking out at the car park, older somehow, but not in the noble way suffering sometimes ages people. More in the way resentment does. He said, You really think she's innocent in all this? I said no. I think she stayed too long trying to fix what you kept breaking. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You always hated me. That irritated me so much I almost smiled. There it was again. The child's logic. If someone names what you did, it must come from hatred because the alternative is that you are accountable. I said, no. I loved you the way people love difficult family members, which is partly why this happened. Everyone loved you around the truth. He turned then and looked at me properly, maybe for the first time in years. So what, I'm just the villain of your story now? I said, no, you're the villain of your wife's marriage. He flinched, just slightly, but he did. For a second I thought maybe something had gotten through. Maybe the ground beneath all his careful self-mythology had shifted. Then he looked away and muttered, you sound just like her. And that was that. Because of course, in his world there are no independent witnesses, only traitors and believers. So yes, my brother is getting divorced, and I think he deserves it. I think Amelia deserved to wake up in a home where nobody was keeping score against her kindness. I think Helena deserves at least one house where love is not measured by who absorbs the most damage without complaining. I think my parents deserve the discomfort of realizing that raising a charming son is not the same as raising a good man. And I think I deserve, finally, to say the true thing out loud without lowering my voice to protect the feelings of the person who caused the harm. If that makes me a bad sister, then maybe I have spent too many years listening to good sisterhood defined as silence. Stories 2. I told my boyfriend not to come over anymore if he doesn't move in with me. I finally realized I wasn't in a relationship. I was running a fully furnished part-time convenience service for a man who wanted all the comfort of a home without ever having to call it ours. I'm 29, my name is Alina, and I live in Bologna. My boyfriend is 22, his name is Matteo, and for almost 2 years I kept telling myself we had a serious adult relationship when what we really had was a pattern that only looked serious if I described it quickly. If I told people the short version, it sounded completely normal. We had been together for a while. We loved each other. We spent most weekends together. He slept at my flat several nights a week. He had a drawer in my bedroom, a toothbrush in my bathroom, slippers under my radiator, favorite coffee in my kitchen, and opinions about where I kept my plates, even though his name was not on the lease, the utility bills, or the furniture that he sat on like it had appeared out of gratitude for his existence. If I told it that way, it sounded like a relationship that was naturally heading toward moving in together. But if I told the truth properly, it sounded different. The truth is that Matteo had been, basically, living at my place for nearly a year without ever actually living there. He came over after work when it suited him. He stayed the night when he wanted affection, dinner, sex, quiet, laundry, company, or relief from his own flatmates. He brought his stress to my home and took his comfort from it. Then, when it came to anything that involved real commitment, shared planning, money, responsibility, future, logistics, or even simply the dignity of calling our life by its real name, he would pull back and say, we didn't need to rush. That phrase became the soundtrack of our relationship. We don't need to rush. He said it. When I asked if he wanted to spend Christmas with my parents in Parma, he said it. When I asked if we should start looking at larger flats, because mine was tiny and he was there constantly anyway. He said it when I asked whether he saw us living together in the next year. He said it when I suggested maybe he should stop leaving half his belongings at my place if he still wanted to act like he was not ready for cohabitation. He said it so often that eventually I started hearing what he actually meant. I want access, not change. The thing is, I didn't go into this relationship trying to force some dramatic milestone. I'm not one of those people who meets a man and starts mentally arranging kitchen shelves after 3 dates. I actually liked taking things slowly in the beginning. Matteo was funny in a dry, understated way. He was intelligent, good at asking questions, easy to talk to, and he seemed very calm compared to my previous relationship, which had been full of volatility and emotional theatrics. Matteo felt safe at first because he seemed measured, thoughtful, grounded. We met through friends at a birthday dinner near Piazza Santo Stefano. My friend Chiara had invited too many people, half of whom didn't know each other, so the table was one of those long, awkward arrangements where conversations kept splintering and reforming. Matteo sat opposite me and kept making these deadpan comments about the restaurant's pretentious portions and the man at the end of the table who was loudly explaining natural wine to everyone as if he had fermented the grapes himself. Every time I looked up, Matteo was watching the room like he was quietly amused by life. There was nothing flashy about him, which I liked. He wasn't trying too hard. He wasn't one of those men who enters a room like it owes him applause. He walked me home that night and kissed me outside my building under a street lamp that made everything look softer than it was. It felt like the start of something clean and adult. For the first few months, it really was good. He lived with two friends on the other side of the city, in a crowded flat that always sounded unpleasant whenever he described it. One flatmate, Divide, worked weird hours and was always cooking at midnight. The other, Paulo, had a girlfriend who practically lived there and monopolized the bathroom. Matteo would joke about it, but I could tell he was irritated by the lack of privacy. At the time, I thought it was just one of those transitional life phases people go through in their early 30s because rent is ridiculous and cities are expensive and adulthood now arrives in pieces instead of all at once. My flat was small but peaceful. One bedroom, old tiled floors, tall windows, terrible insulation in winter, a little balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and 3 plants if nobody moved too suddenly. I loved it. It was mine. I had built that home carefully after my last breakup, piece by piece, making it feel safe. I bought second-hand shelves and painted them myself. I found a table at a flea market. I sewed the cushion covers. I learned how to make a place feel warm without much money because I needed somewhere that felt like the opposite of emotional chaos. Matteo loved my flat from the beginning. He said it was the first place he'd been in for ages that felt like a real home instead of a temporary arrangement. I remember feeling proud when he said that. I took it as a compliment. I thought he was noticing the care I'd put into my life. Now I think he was noticing the convenience. At first, the shift was gradual enough that I didn't even register it. He started staying over twice a week instead of once. Then 3 times. Then he was at my place most weekends from Friday evening until Monday morning, which I didn't mind. Couples do that. Then he began coming over during the week after work because his flat was too chaotic and he just needed one quiet evening. Then he'd bring a laptop and work from my kitchen table because the Wi-Fi at his place was unreliable. Then he started keeping spare clothes here because it was pointless carrying a bag all the time. Then there was a phone charger by my bed, then a shaving kit in my bathroom, then expensive olive oil he liked because he said the one I bought was decent but not the best for finishing pasta, then a set of running shoes by my front door as if the apartment itself had invited him to become permanent. If this had come with actual shared planning, I would probably have been happy. But what made it strange was the disconnect between how much of himself he installed in my daily life and how slippery he became any time the arrangement was named. I noticed it for the first time one Sunday morning, about 8 months into the relationship. We just had breakfast, I was doing dishes, and Matteo was looking around the flat in that way people do when they're not fully conscious of how much they inhabit a space. He said, "You know, I'm here so much I should just start paying for the coffee." He laughed after saying it. I laughed too, but then I said, lightly, "You could pay for more than the coffee at this point." He didn't laugh then. He just said, don't start." It was a small moment, tiny, but it stayed with me because of how fast the warmth vanished from him. Not anger exactly, more like a shutter dropping. Suddenly it was no longer a shared joke. It had become me asking him to step out of the role he preferred, which was beloved guest. I let it go. That became a habit too. Anytime something bothered me, I would calculate whether it was worth the mood change that would follow if I brought it up. Matteo was not explosive. In some ways, I almost wish he had been, because obvious bad behavior is easier to confront. He did something subtler and harder to challenge. He made concerns feel graceless. Small. Tacky. If I brought up practical issues, he acted like I was cheap or formalizing something that should stay romantic. If I brought up emotional imbalance, he acted wounded that I was reducing love to logistics. If I brought up the future, he said I was turning us into a project. Because I didn't want to be the kind of girlfriend who made everything heavy, I kept adjusting, but people don't realize how much resentment can grow inside adjusting. It grows in silence like mold. Matteo had routines at my home, very established routines. He liked the bedroom window cracked open even when it was cold, so I'd wake up freezing and close it after he fell asleep. He liked his shirts washed on a specific setting because he swore my machine was rough on the fabric. He liked dinner later than I did and always said I ate like someone's grandmother. He would stand behind me in the kitchen, kiss my neck, and then ask if I had any Parmigiano left or whether I could pick up more sparkling water because he hated the still one I bought. When he was stressed from work, he would come over, drop onto my sofa, say he was exhausted, and immediately look calmer just by being there. He said my apartment reset his nervous system. Sounds sweet, right? It would have been sweet if he hadn't acted allergic to the idea that the place resetting his nervous system might also be a place where he should contribute like an adult. Instead, he existed in this perfect little loophole. Not visitor enough to feel temporary. Not committed enough to feel accountable. My best friend Kiara noticed it before I let myself fully notice it. Kiara is one of those women who has no patience for emotional ambiguity when it is being used as camouflage. She came over one Friday evening when Matteo was out buying wine, saw his sweater on my chair, his trainers by the door, his laptop on my table, his shampoo in my bathroom, and said, "So when did your tenant stop paying rent?" I rolled my eyes and told her not to be dramatic. She said, "Alana, I'm serious. He's here more than half the week." I said, "It's not like that." She looked around and said, "It is exactly like that. You just haven't sent him an invoice." I laughed then because the alternative was to feel stupid. The thing is, Matteo wasn't cheap in the obvious sense. He would bring wine, pick up pastries, sometimes pay for takeaway, occasionally bring ingredients and cook something elaborate while making a huge show of being a tortured artist over a pan of mushrooms. It wasn't that he never spent money. It was that his spending was always optional and visible, while mine was structural and invisible. I paid rent, electricity, gas, internet, household basics, cleaning products, toilet paper, coffee, the endless trickle of groceries that grow more expensive when another adult is eating 4 nights a week and acting like olives appear naturally in bowls when people are in love. That difference matters. Optional generosity is not the same as shared responsibility. The first serious conversation about moving in happened after about a year together, not because I had some deadline in my head, but because by then the current arrangement had become absurd. He was there all the time. My routines had shifted around him. My space no longer felt fully mine, but it also didn't feel like ours in any recognized or secure way. I couldn't make plans for the flat or for the next year, or even for something as simple as replacing the sofa without feeling like I was unofficially consulting a man who didn't actually owe the place anything. So one night after dinner, I brought it up properly. I remember it very clearly because I prepared myself to be calm, open, adult, reasonable. I said I wasn't trying to pressure him, but that it seemed like we were already living in a half version of cohabitation, and maybe it made sense to talk about whether we wanted to do it intentionally. I said we could discuss finances, timing, whether we stayed at my place or found another one together. I said it didn't have to be immediate, but I wanted to know whether he saw us moving in together in the near future. Matteo listened, then leaned back and rubbed his jaw the way he does when he wants to look thoughtful. Then he said, "I just don't want to ruin what we have by forcing it into some domestic thing before we need to." I actually blinked because the irony was breathtaking. We were already in some domestic thing. He was eating my yogurt in his socks. He had an opinion about how I folded towels. Domesticity was not a future risk. It was the current weather, I said, but we are already doing the domestic part. He smiled, patient, almost indulgent. "Not really. This is the fun version. We still choose each other. Living together full time is different." That sentence bothered me more than I could explain in the moment. We still choose each other, as if moving in together meant the choosing ended and obligation began, as if love was pure only while one person could still leave their mess and return to a legally meaningless room elsewhere. I asked what exactly he was worried about. He said finances, needing space, not wanting to rush, not wanting to repeat his past mistakes. That was the first time he brought up his ex in detail. Her name was Sofia. They had lived together in Milan for about 2 years. According to Matteo, they moved in too quickly, started fighting constantly, became resentful, and by the end the relationship felt more like a contract than love. I had heard the broad outline before, but not much depth. That evening, he suddenly had a lot to say. He described how trapped he had felt, how every tiny disagreement became intensified by shared space, how hard it was to leave once they had built a domestic life, how badly it ended. At the time, I felt sympathy. I thought, okay, maybe he's genuinely scared. Maybe this isn't about me. Maybe he needs time because the last experience wounded him. That seemed plausible, compassionate, adult. What I didn't fully understand yet was that people can use their old wounds to build very comfortable arrangements in the present. Trauma can be real and still become convenient. After that conversation, I backed off. I really did. For months, I barely mentioned moving in. I wanted to prove I wasn't trying to corner him. I wanted to be patient. I thought patience would feel loving. Instead, patience just gave the arrangement more room to harden. He came over more. He stayed longer. He started leaving on Monday mornings from my flat as if that was his base. When his friends had people over late, he would message me, "Can I escape to yours?" When he had an early meeting near my area, he would say it made more sense to sleep at mine. When his washing machine broke, he brought over 2 laundry bags and acted sheepish and charming while I helped him sort things into colors and whites like we were playing house. I remember standing there in my kitchen watching his shirt spin in my machine and thinking, this is either a shared life or a joke, and I'm not sure which one we're in. The resentment really started settling into my bones after my rent went up. Nothing dramatic, just one of those annual increases that landlords explain in bland emails as if all of Europe is not slowly becoming unaffordable for ordinary people. I was already budgeting carefully. Matteo knew that. He also knew he was practically functioning as a second household load in a one-person flat. I didn't ask him to split rent in full. I'm not unreasonable. I knew the lease was mine and the flat had originally been my expense. But I did say, one evening while we were talking about money in general, that if he was going to continue staying over half the week, it would help if he started contributing consistently. Utilities had gone up. Groceries had gone up. Everything had gone up. He got so quiet I knew immediately he was offended. Then he said, if I start paying to stay here, then I'm basically a tenant. I said, no. If you start contributing to a place you live in half the time, then you're an adult. He laughed, but it wasn't amused. You make it sound very transactional. I remember feeling my whole body go cold with anger. That word, transactional, it gets used like a weapon whenever a woman points out material reality, as if the rent collector accepts romance, as if love turns gas-free, as if asking for fairness is somehow uglier than quietly benefiting from imbalance. I said, it already is transactional, Matteo. The only difference is that right now I'm the one paying and pretending not to notice. That started one of our first real fights. He said I was making him feel unwelcome in my home. I said it didn't feel like just my home anymore when his life was all over it. He said he never asked me to do things for him. I said that was exactly the problem. Because he accepted them so naturally, it was as if they were ambient female labor generated by the building. He said that was unfair and insulting. I said what was unfair and insulting was acting like paying for wine twice a week balanced out the existence he was enjoying there. Then he did something he often did when losing ground. He became deeply sad instead of openly angry. Not crying, not dramatic, just disappointed in me. Quiet, hurt, as if I had exposed some vulgar side of myself by speaking plainly. He got up, put on his coat, and said maybe we both needed a little space. Then he left me in my own flat with his charger still plugged into my wall and his pasta in my cupboards. We didn't speak much for 2 days. Then he came over with flowers and tiramisu from that bakery I love, kissed me on the forehead, and said he hated fighting with me. He said he understood my stress, and maybe he had been defensive because money conversations made him feel boxed in. He said he wasn't ready to formalize living together, but he could be more mindful. That was the word, mindful. I should have laughed in his face. Do you know what mindful meant in practice? He started bringing groceries sometimes if I reminded him. That was it. If anything, the half-in, half-out nature of the relationship got worse after that because he had learned something important. I could be pacified with emotional language, and once the tension passed, daily life would resume its convenient shape. And I let it. I'm trying not to write this in a way that makes me sound spineless, but I also don't want to romanticize my own role. I wasn't blind. I was conflicted. Those are different things. There were good parts of the relationship, real good parts. He could be affectionate in ways that felt deeply genuine. He listened when I talked about work. He remembered tiny details about my childhood. When I got sick, he stayed up making tea and checking my temperature. When we traveled together, he was thoughtful and funny and easy to be with. He knew how to make ordinary evenings feel intimate. He would kiss me on the shoulder while I read. He'd pull me into the kitchen and dance with me badly while pasta boiled over. He wasn't some cartoon user twirling a mustache over my utility bills. He was a man who genuinely loved me in some ways and was also extremely comfortable benefiting from a version of love that asked less of him than of me. That complexity is part of what keeps people stuck. The lowest point before the final conversation came during my birthday week. I'd planned a small dinner at my place. Nothing huge, just Chiara, her boyfriend Luca, my cousin Lucia, and Matteo. I cooked all afternoon after work because I'm an idiot and wanted everything to be nice. Matteo had said he'd come early to help. He didn't. He texted an hour beforehand saying he got stuck at the office, then arrived just 10 minutes before everyone else, empty-handed, flustered, apologetic, and somehow still expecting me to emotionally smooth over his lateness because he kissed me quickly and whispered, "I'm here now." During dinner, it became obvious he had forgotten the gift he'd hinted about. Again, not because gifts are everything, but because the whole week he kept saying he had something for me and then showing up with nothing. I told myself not to care. We had a nice evening overall. Everyone laughed. We drank too much wine. Chiara told an outrageous story about a coworker. Lucia stayed late helping me clear up. After everyone left and Matteo and I were in bed, I said quietly, "I was disappointed you came so late." He went immediately defensive. I said I was sorry. "I know. I'm just telling you how I felt." "Well, what do you want me to do now? Go back in time?" I stared at the ceiling for a few seconds and said, "No. I wanted you to care that it mattered." He huffed and turned over. Then, after a minute, he said, "Sometimes I feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough for you lately." That sentence hit me so hard because it was exactly backwards. I was the one shrinking my expectations until they could fit inside whatever he was willing to offer, and still somehow I was being cast as impossible to satisfy. The next morning, Lucia texted me asking if I was okay. Apparently she had noticed the vibe when Matteo arrived and the way I overcompensated all evening. I said I was fine. She replied, "You don't look fine. You look tired in your own house." That line made me cry in the bathroom at work later. Tired in your own house. That was it. I was tired in my own house. Tired of cooking by default. Tired of anticipating another person's preferences without receiving actual security in return. Tired of stepping over his shoes. Tired of hearing "don't rush" from a man who had effectively colonized my home inch by inch while pretending he was bravely preserving romance. Tired of never knowing whether I was allowed to treat him like a partner or only like a guest when it was convenient for him. Tired of the emotional whiplash between intimacy and avoidance. Around that time, Matteo's living situation got worse. David decided to move out. Paolo's girlfriend was there almost full time. The landlord was increasing their rent, and Matteo began complaining more openly about the flat being unsustainable. He started sending me listings as a joke and saying things like, "Can you imagine us in a place with an actual living room?" Or, "We'd kill each other if we had one bathroom," with a smile that let him retreat if I responded seriously. At first, I tried to take the opening. I'd say, "Do you want to actually look together?" And he would instantly soften it into abstraction. "Maybe eventually. It's fun to imagine. Let's survive summer first." Always a horizon that moved when approached. Then came the week that broke me. He had 3 especially bad days at work and basically lived at my flat from Tuesday through Sunday. He used my shower every morning, ate breakfast there, worked from my table one day because he couldn't concentrate at his place, asked if I could wash a shirt because he needed it for a client meeting, invited himself to stay an extra night because he was too drained to commute across the city, and on Sunday afternoon, while sitting on my sofa in socks I had bought because he once complained my floor was cold, he casually said, "God, I'm dreading going back to that flat tonight." I was folding laundry when he said it. Not just my laundry. Ours in all but name. I don't know what shifted in me at that exact second, but something did. It was like a wire finally snapping after being strained for months. I looked at the pile in my hands, one of his shirts mixed with my towels, and thought, this is humiliating. Not because laundry is humiliating. Because the entire arrangement was. I said very evenly, "Then don't go back." He looked up from his phone. "What?" I said, "Don't go back. Move in. Properly." Or stop living like this in between version where you use my place like a refuge and I'm supposed to act grateful you call it love. He stared at me. I think he honestly wasn't prepared for directness. He was used to concerns arriving cushioned in softness. He said, Alana, where is this coming from? That question nearly made me laugh. Where is this coming from? As if it hadn't been coming for a year in small sentences, tense silences, practical conversations he kept dissolving with vague language. I put the laundry down and said, it's coming from the fact that you are here constantly. You live here enough to benefit from everything, but not enough to share responsibility. You want the comfort of moving in without actually moving in. And I'm done pretending that feels okay? He sat up then, annoyed. That's not fair. I said, no. What's not fair is me subsidizing a grown man's emotional and domestic life while he keeps telling me not to rush him. He said, so now I'm using you. I said, if the arrangement walks like using me and sounds like using me, what exactly am I supposed to call it? That was when he got angry for real. He stood up and started pacing my living room, running a hand through his hair, saying I was reducing our relationship to rent and groceries, that I was ignoring everything he brought to my life, that I knew how difficult his past cohabitation had been, that he thought I, of all people, would understand or made him shut down, that he had never lied about not being ready, that if I chose to do nice things for him I couldn't hold them against him later, that nobody asked me to play house. That last part hit hardest. Nobody asked me to play house, I said. You did. Every time you came here instead of home. Every time you left your things. Every time you let me carry the practical side of your comfort. Every time you acted settled here until the second I asked for clarity. He said I was being manipulative by making ultimatums. And that is where the sentence came from. I looked him dead in the face and said, fine. Then let me be clear. If you don't want to move in with me, stop coming over like you already have. Don't come here anymore for this half-life. Don't sleep here 4 nights a week. Don't work from my kitchen. Don't leave your things. Don't rely on my home as your backup life while you protect yourself from commitment by calling me impatient. He actually went still. The room went so quiet I could hear a scooter outside on the street. He said slowly, so what? I either move in or I'm banned. I said no. You either build a real shared life with me, or you stop treating my home like a trial version of one. He asked if I was seriously throwing him out. I said, I am telling you that I can't keep doing this, and I meant it. Not as theater. Not as leverage. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I was saying the exact thing I felt without adjusting it to be more digestible. He grabbed his bag, started stuffing random things into it, and said he needed air. Then he paused in the doorway and said, you know what? This is exactly why I was scared to move in with you. Everything becomes control. I said, no. Everything becomes clear. Then he left. I thought I would feel panicked as soon as the door shut. Instead, I felt something almost holy. Silence. Not the tense silence after a fight. The real kind. The kind that belongs to you. I looked around my flat, and for the first time in ages I felt how much I had been bracing inside it. Even when things were good, I was bracing. For his moods, his arrival times, his habits, his non-decisions, the next conversation that would somehow become my fault for having happened. I sat on the sofa and noticed stupid small things. One of his socks under the coffee table. His mug in the sink. The indentation where he'd been sitting. It all suddenly looked less like intimacy and more like evidence. He texted that night saying he was too angry to talk and that he couldn't believe I'd given him an ultimatum over sleeping arrangements. Sleeping arrangements. That's how he reduced it, as if the issue were bedtime logistics, not the entire structure of our relationship. I replied only once. I said it wasn't about sleeping arrangements. It was about honesty. Then I turned my phone off. The next 2 days were miserable. I'm not going to pretend I floated around in empowered serenity while Florence and the machine played in the background. I was heartbroken. I missed him. I kept picking up my phone. I kept almost apologizing just to end the distance. I kept replaying the fight and hearing all the places he'd made me sound cruel, rigid, demanding. That's the other hard part when you finally say the true thing in an unequal relationship. The truth can feel mean because people have built comfort on your silence. Kiara came over with takeaway and wine and listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she asked if he had said 6 months ago, "You're right, this is unfair, let's make a plan," would you have felt relief? I said yes. She asked, "And when you said it now, Did he act like a man who cared that you were hurting, or like a man whose arrangement was being threatened? I didn't answer for a while. Then I said, "The second one?" She nodded. "There's your answer?" But of course it wasn't that simple emotionally. Matteo and I weren't strangers in a housing dispute. We were in love, or some version of love mixed with habit and avoidance and desire and built up resentment. I didn't stop loving him because I finally got angry enough to speak clearly. I just stopped being able to survive the shape of things as they were. On the third day, he came by while I was at work and left a bag outside my door with some of his things that had been at mine. He didn't message first. He just sent a photo of the bag afterward and wrote, "Thought it was better to clear space?" Clear space? Again, the emotional framing was so tidy compared to the mess underneath. I got home, saw the bag, carried it inside, and burst into tears at the sight of how selectively he had packed. Some shirts, shaving kit charger, slippers. But not everything. Of course not everything. Just enough to make a point. Enough to punish. Enough to force me to deal with the rest later. There was still a coat on the hook, running shoes by the door, 2 books by my bed, and a stupid expensive jar of anchovies in my kitchen he'd insisted were superior to the ones I bought. I hated how intimate abandonment can look in domestic fragments. He called that weekend. We talked for nearly 2 hours. At first he was calmer, sad, reflective even. He said he understood I had been feeling unsupported. He admitted maybe he had gotten too comfortable at my place. He said he never wanted me to feel taken for granted. He said he had been overwhelmed and defensive. For a little while, I let myself believe we were finally having the real conversation we should have had months earlier. Then I asked, very simply, "Do you want to live with me?" Long pause. Then, "I don't know if I can answer that under pressure." There it was again. The vanishing horizon. I said, "It's been almost 2 years." He said, "Timelines make him panic." I said, "It's not a timeline. It's your actual life. You're already halfway doing it." He said that was exactly why he needed space to think. I said, "You've had space. You've had my whole flat as space." He got frustrated again. Said I was turning this into a yes or no exam when feelings are more complicated. Said maybe he wanted a future with me but not like this. Said maybe if I hadn't made it an ultimatum, things could have unfolded naturally. That last part made something in me settle permanently. Because do you know what naturally meant in Matteo language? Indefinitely. Naturally meant he continued enjoying the arrangement until some external pressure forced change. Naturally meant I kept absorbing the cost, practical and emotional, while pretending patience was virtue. Naturally meant nothing would happen unless it happened in the exact way that protected him from discomfort. I asked him, "What would you have done if I'd never said anything?" He didn't answer. He just said that wasn't fair. And I realized that was the answer. If I'd never said anything, nothing would have changed. Not because he was malicious in some cinematic way, but because the arrangement served him perfectly. After that call, we drifted into a weird limbo for about 3 weeks. Not broken up exactly. Not together in any meaningful sense. We'd text sometimes, cautiously. Once he asked how work was. Once I asked if he was okay. Once he sent a photo of a dog outside a cafe because it looked like one I'd loved on holiday in Trieste. Little ghosts of intimacy. No resolution. Meanwhile, my flat began feeling like mine again in painful stages. I washed the sheets and realized how much I liked choosing when the window stayed open. I rearranged the kitchen shelf and put things back where I wanted them. I started buying food based only on my own preferences. I slept diagonally in the bed. I noticed how much less cleanup there was after a week. I noticed my grocery bill drop. I noticed the way my shoulders unclenched in the evenings. Relief is very clarifying when it arrives alongside grief. Lucia came over one Sunday and helped me finally gather the rest of Matteo's things. She didn't make a spectacle of it. We just went room by room: shoes, books, t-shirts in the laundry basket, cables, toothpaste, a half-used cologne, a coffee mug he had started calling his, which irritated me on principle. We put everything in 2 bags and 1 box. At one point, she held up his black sweater and said, "Do you want me to say something comforting or honest?" I said, "Honest." She said, "You have been living with a man who wanted to audition for commitment without signing the contract." It was such a ridiculous sentence that I laughed until I nearly cried. Matteo came to collect the rest on a Thursday evening. I almost asked him not to because I didn't know if I could handle seeing him, but I also wanted it done. Final. Adult. Clean. He looked tired when he arrived. Sad too. Really sad. I need to say that because I don't want to flatten him into an emotionless opportunist. He wasn't. He looked like a man who had lost something real and still didn't fully understand his own role in losing it. He stepped inside, looked around, and immediately noticed things were different. I'd moved the armchair, put away the extra blankets, cleared the bathroom shelf. His absence had shape now. He said, quietly, "It feels strange in here?" I said, "Yes." He picked up one of the bags and asked if I was really ending things over this. And that question, more than almost anything else, told me we were never going to understand each other properly. To him, it was over this, as if this were a single argument, a technical dispute, a misunderstanding about staying over. To me, it was over the whole architecture of what loving me had looked like to him, comforting, affectionate, intimate, and fundamentally noncommittal whenever commitment required sacrifice. I said, "No. I'm ending things because what we had only worked if I accepted less than what it was already asking from me." He looked gutted, then defensive, then gutted again. He said he loved me. I believed him. I said I loved him too. I meant that. Then he asked why love wasn't enough. That question would have ruined me a year earlier. That evening it only made me tired. I said, because love without responsibility starts to feel like consumption. He stared at me. I think he hated the sentence because he understood it. He left with the bags and the box. At the door, he turned back like maybe there would be one more dramatic chance to reroute the scene. There wasn't. He said he never meant to hurt me. I said I know. He said sometimes people hurt each other anyway. I said yes, but not always equally. Then he left. Afterward, I sat on the floor in my living room and cried so hard my chest hurt. Not because I thought I'd made a mistake, because doing the right thing can still feel like being split open. It's been 4 months now. We haven't gotten back together. He tried once, around 6 weeks after, sending a long message saying he'd been thinking a lot and realizing he'd let fear run his choices. He said he missed me, missed us, missed the feeling of home we had. But even in that message, there was something unfinished. He wanted to talk, explore, see where we were. He still couldn't say plainly and fully what he was willing to do differently in real terms. He missed the feeling of home, yes. But I had already learned that being someone's feeling of home is not the same as being chosen like one. I wrote back kindly. I thanked him for apologizing. I said I cared about him, but I also said I couldn't go back into a version of the relationship where clarity arrived only after I broke under confusion. He didn't respond for 3 days, then sent, "I understand." I'm not sure he did, but maybe he understood enough. Sometimes I still wonder if I was too harsh. Sometimes I hear his voice saying ultimatum and control and pressure, and for a moment I feel like the villain in my own memory. Then I remember all the little daily realities that words like pressure conveniently erase. I remember paying for another person's comfort while being told not to name it. I remember feeling like a host in my own home. I remember folding his clothes while he avoided deciding whether our life was real. I remember how shocked he was when access finally met a boundary. And then I don't feel like the villain anymore. I feel like a woman who got tired of translating crumbs into commitment. If I'm honest, the hardest part to explain to other people is that I didn't actually want a dramatic ultimatum. I wanted peace. I wanted congruence. I wanted the facts of my life to match the language of my relationship. If a man is sleeping in my bed half the week, eating in my kitchen, showering in my bathroom, storing belongings in my bedroom, using my home to recover from his bad days, and expecting emotional warmth at the end of all of it, then I think it is perfectly reasonable for me to ask whether he is building a life with me or just borrowing one. That was the real question under everything. And Mateo, for all his talk about not rushing, never really wanted to answer it as long as the unspoken version kept working. So yes, I told my boyfriend not to come over anymore if he didn't move in with me. Not because I wanted to trap him. Not because I wanted rent money. Not because I was trying to force a milestone. Because I finally understood that letting someone repeatedly enjoy the privileges of closeness while refusing the responsibilities of it will rot your self-respect from the inside. It makes you feel needy for wanting acknowledgement of what is already happening in front of your face. It turns your home into a negotiation you're somehow expected to lose politely. I don't think asking for clarity was cruel. Stories 3. I told my daughter-in-law they aren't ready for a baby, and now my son says I've poisoned the family. Apparently one sentence over cake and paper napkins was enough to turn me from the supportive mother-in-law into the woman everyone now talks about in lowered voices. I am 58, my name is Marianne, and I live with my husband Look in a village outside Limoges where everything is farther away than people from cities seem to understand. The bakery is not around the corner. The chemist is not downstairs. There is no tube, no tram, no bus every 10 minutes. If you need groceries, a doctor, a pharmacy, a blood test, baby formula at 8 in the evening, or an emergency appointment because something feels wrong, you get in a car and drive. That is how life works here. It is not glamorous, but it is practical, and when people decide to build families in places like this, practical things matter more than ideals. My son Etine is 31. His wife Claire is 27. They are expecting their first baby in about 7 weeks. Everyone else in the family is floating around this pregnancy as if it is a pastel-colored miracle wrapped in knitted blankets and social media announcements. I am the one person who keeps seeing the part underneath all of that, the daily machinery, the things that keep a child alive and a mother from falling apart. I know how ugly that sounds. I know I probably sound like one of those bitter older women who cannot stand seeing younger people do things differently. That is exactly how Claire's sister Amy Lai looks at me now. But I also know what it is to raise children without pretending love itself solves logistics. And the truth is, Claire cannot drive. Not doesn't like driving much, not gets nervous on motorways. I mean, she does not drive at all, no license, no car, no ability. She freezes even talking about it. She has said herself that she hates roads, hates traffic circles, hates changing gears, hates the feeling of not being fully in control, even though, from where I'm standing, that is exactly what her whole adult life looks like right now. If they lived in Bordeaux or Lyon or Paris, perhaps none of this would matter as much. But they do not. They live 23 minutes from me, depending on the weather, on a winding stretch near St. L.A., Honor de Noblat in a rented little house with one small spare room they have turned into a nursery. It is charming in photographs. In real life, it is isolated. Etine works long shifts at a distribution center outside Limoges and leaves before dawn most days. They have one car, and he takes it. Claire is often alone from early morning until evening. Once this baby is born, she will be alone there with an infant and no way to go anywhere unless my son is home, I am available, or she begs a neighbor. And yes, before anyone says it, I know women managed centuries of motherhood without driving. I know babies do not pop out requiring a hatchback and a full tank. That is not my point. My point is that Claire and E.T. Hen have built their life in a way that assumes somebody else will quietly cover every gap. That somebody, more and more often, has been me. It did not start badly. That is the frustrating part. If it had started badly, I might have drawn a line earlier. When Etin first brought Claire to Sunday lunch 3 years ago, I liked her immediately. She was polite without being syrupy, which I appreciate. She asked Look questions about the garden and actually listened to the answers. She brought a tart ox palms from a bakery in Limoges and apologized because she did not know whether I preferred to make dessert myself. That kind of manners still counts with me. She was soft-spoken, maybe a little shy, with dark hair always tucked behind one ear and the sort of face people describe as gentle because they do not know what else to call it. She was from Bordeaux originally, had lived in Poitiers for university, then moved here when she and Tien got serious and he found stable work. She had been doing remote admin for a small wine importer, which sounded modern and vague in equal measure. That first year, they seemed sweet together. Young, a little disorganized, but affectionate. They rented a flat in Limoges at first, and Claire not driving did not strike me as such a crisis, because she could walk places and take the bus. I remember asking casually one afternoon whether she had never learned. She laughed and said she had tried lessons at 19 but was hopeless. Then she said, still laughing, I'm one of those useless city girls who would probably hit a tractor before reaching the end of the lane. Look laughed too. I did not. Not because it offended me, but because I grew up with the kind of women who never described helplessness as quirky. Still, at that stage it seemed like one of those mismatches couples work around. Etienne drove. Claire took buses or trains when she needed to. I assumed, probably naively, that at some point she would revisit it, especially if they stayed in this region. It never occurred to me that she would move deeper into the countryside and still behave as if driving were some optional hobby she simply had not gotten around to. About 18 months into their relationship, Etienne called and said they were thinking of renting a little house farther out because it was cheaper, quieter, and had a small garden. He sounded excited in the way men do when they have seen one picturesque thing and immediately decided they are ready for a different life. Look thought it was sensible. More space for less money. Claire said it would be lovely to have birdsong and fresh air and a proper kitchen. I asked the obvious question, how will Claire get around? Tian answered too quickly. We'll figure it out. That sentence should be engraved over the gates of every preventable disaster. They moved anyway? At first they made it sound romantic. Wildflowers by the road, stars at night, a neighbor with hens, bread from the village on Saturdays. Claire posted pictures of morning, mist over the fields, and little mugs of coffee on the windowsill. For about 2 months, it seemed fine, because every life looks manageable before routine begins to ask something from it. Then the favors started. Could I take Claire to the pharmacy because Tine had the car and she had run out of her prescription? Could I pick her up from the train station because the connection from Poitiers was delayed and Teen was still at work? Could I bring over some groceries because they had forgotten the shops early on Sundays? Could I drop Claire at her hair appointment because her friend canceled? Could I collect a parcel from Limoges because it needed a signature and Claire couldn't get there? None of those requests were outrageous on their own. Families help. I am not made of stone. And for a while I did not mind. It even felt nice to be needed in small ways. I had gone through that ugly transition many mothers go through when their children stop needing practical things from you and begin needing only opinions they mostly ignore. Giving Claire a lift now and then felt ordinary, maybe even bonding. What I did not realize was how quickly, now and then, can harden into expectation. Once they were married, it got worse. Not in some dramatic way. Just in the way damp gets worse in a house quietly, until one day the wall is warped and you cannot remember when it started. Claire would call not to ask if I was free, but to say things like, I've got my appointment on Thursday at 11, so I'll need to leave here by 10:30, as if we were two secretaries confirming a calendar. Or Etienne would mention over dinner, Mom, can you take Claire to the scan next week? I'm on the early shift. Already assuming the answer before asking. Sometimes I would say yes because saying no to a medical appointment makes you sound monstrous. Sometimes I would say I had plans and there would be this short silence that always carried the same message. Well, then what are we supposed to do? That was the real issue. Their entire structure depended on everyone around them cushioning consequences. Especially me. I did talk to Tan about it more than once. People keep acting as if I exploded out of nowhere, but I did not. Last autumn, long before the pregnancy was obvious and the baby furniture began arriving, I sat with him at our kitchen table while Look was outside pruning roses. I said, if you are going to stay in that house, Claire needs to learn to drive. He sighed immediately, which told me he had heard it from someone else before, maybe even from himself in private moments. He said, Mum, it's not that simple. I said, no, it is exactly that simple. Difficult, maybe. Emotional, maybe, but simple. Then he told me something I only partially knew. When Claire was 17, her father had been in a serious car accident on the ring road outside Bordeaux. He survived, but badly injured. Claire had been in the passenger seat. Ever since, being in control of a car made her panic. She could ride with other people, though nervously sometimes, but the idea of learning herself turned her stomach inside out. She had tried lessons in university and ended up crying in a parking area. After that, she avoided the whole subject. I am not heartless. I understood that better after hearing it. Truly, I did. Trauma is real. Fear is real. But I asked the question that still seems reasonable to me. If the fear is that disabling, why move to a place where driving is not an accessory but a necessity? Why keep saying one day, one day, one day, while arranging your life around other people's availability? And why choose to bring a baby into that exact setup before the problem is addressed? When I asked Etienne some version of that, he got angry. Not shouting angry, worse in my opinion. He got tired of me. Tired in that patronizing adult, child way sons sometimes get with their mothers once they decide concern is criticism. He said Claire was working on it. He said not everyone had to live by my standards. He said people manage all sorts of families in all sorts of circumstances. He said plenty of mothers do not drive. Again, I know that. But most of those mothers are not stranded in a rural house while their husband has the only vehicle 40 minutes away and no bus passes the lane except twice a day. The pregnancy made everything sharper. They announced it just before Christmas. Claire was glowing. Etienne looked shocked and proud in that charming male way. Everyone cried a little, even Look, though he would deny it. I was happy. I was. I bought tiny knitted socks I pretended were practical and immediately began thinking of names. But right underneath the happiness, the calculation began in my head: prenatal appointments, blood tests, shopping, emergencies, birth, postpartum vaccines, fevers, formula runs, H visits, doctor consultations, sleep deprivation, winter roads. I could see the whole chain of dependency unfolding before anyone else had even put the ultrasound photo down. And then it started. At first, I told myself it was natural. Pregnancy involves appointments and help and adjustments. Of course, I would take Claire to some visits if Etienne could not. Of course, I would. But after about the sixth time of rearranging my own week because my pregnant daughter-in-law needed to get somewhere essential and had no independent way to do it, I stopped feeling helpful and started feeling conscripted. There was one Thursday in February that I think I will remember for years because it finally crystallized everything. I had a dentist appointment in Limoges and afterward planned to meet my friend Colette for lunch, something I had arranged 2 weeks in advance. At 8:30 that morning, Claire called me crying because she had been awake half the night with pain low on one side, and the midwife wanted her checked at maternity triage. Etienne had already left for work and said he could not just walk out. Claire had called one neighbor, but they were in Angoulême for the day. So I canceled the dentist, canceled lunch, drove 24 minutes to fetch her, then 35 minutes into Limoges because traffic was wretched. Nothing serious, thank God. Ligament pain, they said. Rest, hydration, all fine. But during the drive there, Claire was shaking, and between little gasps she kept saying, I'm sorry. I know this is such a pain. And do you know what I heard in that? Not malice. Not entitlement even. I heard that she knew. She knew this was unsustainable. She knew she had built a life in which any small health scare turned into a family operation. She knew she had no control over the most ordinary emergency. And still, somehow, that knowledge never became action. It only became apology. On the drive back, I asked very gently whether she had thought about therapy specifically for driving anxiety. She went quiet, then said she had looked into it, but it was expensive, and anyway now with the baby coming there was so much else to think about. I said, that is exactly why it matters now. She stared out the window and said, Marianne, some women have babies without knowing how to do all sorts of things. I said, yes. But they should not choose not to learn what they can. She did not speak to me for the rest of the drive. After that, things between us changed, though not openly. Claire became more careful around me. Sweeter on the surface, but careful. Etienne became more protective of her, which in practice meant more irritable with me. Luck said I was pushing too hard. My daughter Sophie, who lives in Poitiers and has 2 boys of her own, told me over the phone that my point was practical, but my tone was getting sharp. She said, Maman, you may be right, but right and useful are not the same thing. She has a way of sounding exactly like my mother when she is most irritating. Then came the matter of the birth plan. I nearly laughed when I first heard the phrase used so confidently. Claire had a folder. Of course she did. Breathing preferences, music options, delayed cord clamping, skin to skin, low lighting if possible, all the trendy modern things young couples discuss as if hospitals are boutique hotels. None of that bothered me. What bothered me was the actual transport plan underneath the folder. If she went into labor while Etienne was home, obviously he would drive her. If he was at work, she would call him. If he could not get back in time, she would call me. That was it. That was the plan. I was effectively their reserve husband. I said, and if I am not here? Etienne shrugged and said, You're usually here? Usually. As if my existence had been folded into their reproductive planning like a spare blanket kept in a cupboard. Look later told me I looked so furious at the dinner table he thought I might throw the salt cellar. He was not entirely wrong. I asked them what they planned to do once the baby was born and Claire needed pediatric checkups, vaccines, fevers assessed, emergency prescriptions, or just 10 bloody minutes out of that house because she was losing her mind. Etienne said he could take days when needed. Claire said the health visitor had mentioned home visits at the beginning. Then, and this is the part that lodged in me like a fishbone, Claire smiled a little and said, and we're lucky because Marianne is so close. Lucky. I did not feel lucky. I felt used. I know that sounds ugly. I know grandmothers are supposed to beam and say, of course, whatever you need. I am not refusing to help with the baby. That was never the issue. I would take that child in my arms and crossfire for it if I had to. The issue is that they have built their baseline assumption of adulthood around my permanent availability, then wrap that assumption in the language of family closeness so I look cruel if I object. The final blow-up happened at Claire's baby shower, though they called it a tea, because apparently showers are too American unless cupcakes are involved. It was held at our house because theirs is too small and because luck, in a moment of unwise generosity, said our garden would look pretty in spring. So naturally I hosted, cooked, rearranged furniture, bought flowers, borrowed extra chairs from Colette, and spent the morning cutting little sandwiches no one under 30 ever appreciates. Claire's mother, Hal Ni, came from Bordeaux. Her sister Aimee came too, along with a few friends from Limoges and Poitiers. Sophie brought her boys, who nearly destroyed my hallway with toy cars. Everyone kept saying how lovely it all was, how exciting, how close the date suddenly seemed. Claire looked beautiful, I will give her that. She wore a pale blue dress and kept one hand under her stomach as if holding the child up from beneath. Etienne was in a silly, overprotective mood, hovering and fussing over whether she had enough water and whether someone had opened a window. For most of the afternoon, I kept my mouth shut. Then the conversation drifted, as it always does, toward the baby's arrival and how they'll manage. Haley lives too far to be there often. Aimee has 2 small children and works full-time. Sophie said the first 6 weeks are a blur. One of Claire's friends joked that new mothers don't know whether they need sleep, a shower, or to cry in a cupboard. Everyone laughed. Then Claire, smiling and rubbing her belly, said, "Honestly, we'll survive. And if Etienne is on shift, I'll just call Marianne. She's my emergency service." The whole table laughed again. That sentence hit me like a slap, maybe because it was said so lightly, maybe because it was true, maybe because for months I had been swallowing the feeling that my life was being annexed by 2 adults who still talked as if help would simply materialize around them because they were having a baby. I said, before I could soften it, "Claire, that is exactly the problem. If your plan for motherhood is I'll just call Marianne, then you are not ready to be parents yet." You could feel the air change. It was extraordinary how quickly warmth can leave a room. Even the children seemed to go quieter. Claire stared at me as if I had slapped her in front of everyone. Etienne went red immediately and said, "Mum." But once the sentence was out, everything I had been forcing down for months rushed in behind it. I said, "No, I mean it. A baby is not a cottagecore fantasy. You live in the middle of nowhere. You have 1 car, Etienne is always working, and Claire cannot drive. That is not a small, charming detail anymore. That is a real problem." Claire's face crumpled before she even cried. That was almost worse. She just looked stunned, then humiliated, then furious underneath the humiliation. Haley put a hand on her arm. Etienne stood up so fast he knocked his chair. Look said my name once in that warning tone husbands use when they know disaster has arrived and think tone alone might reverse it. I should have stopped there. I know that, but I did not because I was too full of all the times I had rearranged my own life to make theirs function. So I kept talking. I said, "I have driven you to scans, to the pharmacy, to urgent appointments, to shopping, to everything, and now you are talking about a baby as if the answer to every practical difficulty is me. I am happy to help, but help is not the same as a foundation. If you cannot get your own child to a doctor because you have no way to leave the house, that matters." Claire started crying properly then, not quietly either. Great, shuddering tears. Tien turned to her first, which of course he did, then back to me with an expression I have never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly, more like disgust. He said, "How dare you do this here?" I said, "When was I supposed to say it? After the baby is born and I'm driving half the DA apartment because nobody planned?" Halney said, coldly, "Marianne, this is cruel. Aimee, who has always been polite to me, and therefore twice as dangerous when she is not, said, 'You are talking about my sister like she is defective.' I said, 'No, I am talking about reality.' Claire stood up and said, through tears, 'You think I don't know? You think I don't know what I can't do?' That should have stopped me. It should have. There are moments when you see another person's wound exposed, and you either step back or press harder. I pressed harder. I said, quieter then, but worse for being quieter. Knowing and fixing are not the same. After that, the afternoon was dead. People lingered just long enough to be polite, then began gathering bags and plates and wrapping paper. No one shouted. In some ways, I almost wish someone had. Quiet disapproval is so much harder to defend yourself against. Claire went upstairs to wash her face. Etienne barely spoke to me except to say they were leaving. Luc carried boxes into the kitchen so hard he nearly cracked one of the serving dishes. Sophie wouldn't meet my eye. When everyone had gone, Luc said, "What the hell was that?" I said, "The truth." He said, "No. That was you choosing the cruelest possible moment to say something you have been rehearsing for months." That stung because it was partly true. I had been rehearsing it, maybe not word for word, but in essence. Over every lift to the clinic, every message assuming my availability, every cheery mention that I was so close and such a help. I had been storing up the speech like a storm stores heat. I expected Etienne to cool down after a day or two. Instead, he got worse. He called that evening and said I had humiliated his wife, not upset her. Humiliated her? He said she had spent the whole drive home crying and asking why I hated her. I said I did not hate her. I said I was terrified for what daily life would look like once the baby came and everyone stopped pretending logistics are solved by sentiment. He said if I was concerned, there were 100 ways to speak privately and compassionately. I said I had tried privately repeatedly and been brushed off every time. Then he said the sentence that has replayed in my head ever since. He said, "You didn't say we're not ready. You said she's not ready. You made it her failure." I opened my mouth to argue and then stopped because he was right about that part. The truth, if I am brutally honest, is that I am angry with both of them, but I said it at her. Claire is the visible dependency, the one I am physically driving around, the one whose limitations force themselves into my week. But Etienne is the one who chose the house, chose not to force the issue, chose to drift into fatherhood while assuming women around him would form a net underneath every gap. He has been just as irresponsible, only in a more familiar masculine way, which perhaps I am too practiced at absorbing. I still did not apologize. That is the awful part. Even with that realization, I still did not immediately apologize because another part of me kept saying, yes, perhaps I was too blunt, but was I wrong? Was I wrong, or just impolite? There is a difference, and families love erasing it whenever politeness protects the more comfortable lie. The next week was miserable. Claire sent me one message only thin. "I hope when this baby comes you remember what it felt like to be scared and judged at the same time." I stared at that for a long time. Then I put the phone down and cried in my laundry room like a fool. Because of course I remember. I remember too well. I had Sophie at 20, 4 and 18, and at 27, we did not have money. Luc worked road crews and left before sunrise. When Sophie was 6 months old, she had bronchiolitis so badly one winter night that I drove her myself through freezing fog to the emergency department in Limoges with Luc unreachable and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I remember praying at red lights. I remember the sound she made breathing. I remember parking badly and running through automatic doors with her bundled against my chest. I remember the doctor later saying it was good I came when I did. That memory is part of why I feel the way I do. Not because I think all mothers must perform competence exactly as I did, but because I know what helplessness looks like when a child is sick and you are the only adult present. It is not theoretical to me. It is not a lifestyle preference. It is not some women do things differently. It is the difference between acting and waiting. Sophie came to see me 2 days after the shower. She brought pastries, which is how she announces she intends to tell me something unwelcome. We sat at the kitchen table and she said, "Maman, do you want me to say what everyone else is saying or what I think?" I said, "What you think." She said, "I think you are right to be worried. I think they are underprepared. I think Etienne has quietly built a life that depends on you far too much, and I think Claire is more fragile than she wants to admit. But I also think you picked the one thing she is most ashamed of and hid it in front of an audience. So now no one can hear the practical concern because all they can hear is the cruelty." I asked whether Claire had always been ashamed of it. Sophie looked at me like I was dense. Obviously. You think a woman nearly 8 months pregnant living in the countryside doesn't know how exposed she is? That made me feel sick because, again, I knew that too, somewhere underneath the anger. I knew Claire knew, which means what I said was not revelation. It was punishment. And still, even knowing all this, I cannot say the concern itself vanished. Yesterday morning, before I sat down to write this, Claire missed another midwife class because Etienne had the car and the woman who was supposed to give her a lift had a fever. She stayed home, sent apologies, and spent the day resting, which is what people call being trapped when no one wants to use harsher language. Look says I need to separate the question of whether I was right from the question of whether I was kind. He says old age is making me lazy with tenderness. I told him old age is making me impatient with denial. He said those are not opposites. That annoyed me because it sounded wise. What makes this all worse is that I do love Claire. Or at least I did, and part of me still does. She is not spoiled. She is not lazy in the obvious sense. She is not one of those dreadful women who weaponize incompetence with a smile. She is genuinely frightened, genuinely trying in other areas, and carrying more vulnerability than she shows. She makes soup when Look is ill. She remembers birthdays. She bought me seeds for my garden last spring because I once mentioned liking sweet peas when I was a girl. None of that is false. And yet another truth can exist alongside it. She has allowed fear to become a family operating system. If she were my daughter instead of my daughter-in-law, maybe I would have spoken differently. That thought haunts me. Would I have sat her down, held her hand, asked what concrete plans she had for therapy and lessons and emergency backups? Would I have put the blame equally on her husband? Would I have found gentler words if she carried my blood? I do not know. I like to think yes, and that does not flatter me. As for AITA, he has not spoken to me in 9 days except through one clipped message about collecting a bag of baby cloves hail mailed to our address by mistake. He is furious, but beneath the fury I suspect something else that I named a truth he had hoped not to examine until much later, if ever. It is easy to call your mother cruel. It is harder to admit your wife cannot leave the house alone with your child once you go back to work. I have offered, through luck, to speak to them both privately if they want. Not to defend myself, though perhaps that is impossible, but to actually discuss solutions. Therapy. Intensive driving lessons with a specialist for anxious drivers. A second-hand automatic instead of the little manual car they currently have. Moving closer to Limoges before the baby is old enough for regular appointments. Building a plan that does not have my name hidden under every practical question mark. So far there has been no answer. Maybe they will never forgive me for the way I said it. Maybe they should not. I keep turning that over. But if the baby comes and winter settles in and Claire sits in that little house with a feverish infant and no way to get to help except to phone whoever is free, I do not think my sentence will suddenly become less true because it was impolite. That is the part I cannot escape. I was cruel. I may even have been unforgivable in the moment I chose and the way I chose it. But I do not think I was imagining the problem. I think I lost my temper at a truth everyone else preferred to keep decorating with ribbons. So now the family is split neatly in two. On one side, the people who think I said something monstrous to a pregnant woman. On the other, mostly silent, the people who suspect I am not entirely wrong but wish I had let them keep pretending until after the birth. And in the middle of it are me, Claire, and a baby not yet born, already carrying the weight of other people's avoidance. If I could go back, I would not say it at the tea table. I would not say it in front of her mother and sister and friends. I would not make her cry in her own blue dress with one hand on her stomach and the other searching for a napkin. But I think I still would have said it. Just not like that. Stories 4. I refused to let my daughter go on her 8th grade school trip, and now half the parents at school look at me like I'm a prison warden. The moment my daughter screamed that she hated me, I almost picked up her suitcase and drove her to the school anyway until I remembered the messages the other girls had written about her when they thought no adult would ever see them. I am a 39-year-old mother in Leuven, and for the last 3 weeks I have felt like the villain in everybody else's story. My daughter Sophia is 13, in 8th grade, and if you met her at the wrong moment, you would think she is fearless. She has that very sharp, bright kind of confidence that teenagers can have when they are trying very hard to look like they need nothing from anyone. She is funny in a dry way, very observant, and the kind of child who notices when a cashier looks tired and says thank you twice. But if you met her at the right moment, meaning a quiet moment at home when the door is shut and there is no audience, you would see what I see. She is still a little girl in so many ways. She still crawls onto the sofa with a blanket when she is upset. She still asks me to sit in her room when she cannot sleep. She still says, "Can you just stay until I fall asleep?" in the same voice she used when she was 6. Her father, Lucas, and I have been divorced for 4 years. Not explosively divorced. Not the kind where plates break and police come. Ours was the colder kind, the kind where two people stop being kind to each other long before they stop sharing an address. We have shared custody, though if I am honest, most of the daily labor of parenting falls to me. I know the PE schedule, the allergy forms, the passwords for the school portal, which subjects make Sophia panic, which teacher she trusts, which days her stomach hurts before she even gets out of bed. Lucas loves her, I don't doubt that, but he loves her in a weekend way. He is very good at pizza nights and cinema plans and saying yes fast. I am the one who has to live inside the consequences. When the school first announced the 8th grade trip to Prague, Sophia acted as if she had been handed a passport to adulthood. She came home flushed with excitement, talking so fast I could barely keep up. 4 days, 3 nights, sightseeing museums, some guided activities, one evening river cruise, a visit to the old town, a ghost tour that I immediately said sounded ridiculous for children, and she immediately said proved I was old. She already knew which girls she hoped to room with. She wanted new trainers. She wanted a disposable camera for the aesthetic, which made me feel about 112 years old. I said yes at the beginning. I want to be fair about that. I was not always against it. I paid the deposit. I signed the preliminary form. I even helped her choose a navy suitcase because she said the pink one was childish and she would rather die than be seen at school with it. What makes this whole thing so ugly is that I changed my mind. People are strangely forgiving of a strict parent if the strictness is obvious from the start. If I had said no on the first day, I would simply be that difficult mother. But saying yes, letting a child dream, letting her count days on the kitchen calendar, and then taking it back, that makes you cruel in a way people understand immediately. The part nobody outside my house seems to care about is why I changed my mind. Sophia has had a hard 2 years socially. Not catastrophic, not one of those cases that makes the local paper, but bad enough that I no longer trust the phrase teenage drama. We moved from Namur to Leuven after the divorce because my job is here and Lucas had already moved in with his new partner near Mechelen. Changing schools at that age was terrible for her. In primary school, she had close friends, routines, a sense of belonging. In secondary school, she got sorted instantly, like children do. Who is confident? Who is weird? Who is pretty? Who is easy to mock? Who can be useful? Who can be ignored? Sophia landed in that dangerous middle area where she was not fully excluded, but never secure. Invited 1 week, frozen out the next. Added to group chats, and then laughed at for taking them seriously. Kept close enough to be used as an audience, not close enough to be protected. There were 3 girls in particular, Clara Ines and Ruse, who seemed to orbit every problem. Individually, each could stand in front of an adult and look perfectly harmless. Together, they were the kind of pack that can make another child doubt her own memory. I know parents say things like that all the time, and sometimes they are just defending their own child blindly. I am aware of that, but I am not talking about one argument over a pencil case. I am talking about months of low-level nastiness that always stopped just short of anything dramatic enough to force the school to act. They hid Sophia's trainers during sports and told her maybe she had left them at home. They laughed about her haircut after she got it trimmed too short. They once made a fake screenshot of a boy from another class, supposedly calling her desperate, and passed it around until she cried in the girls' toilets. When she confronted them, they told her it was clearly a joke and she needed to learn to take banter. The school counselor, Thomas, used that exact word with me in a meeting once, banter, and I remember feeling something dark and tired settle in my chest. I am not a native. I know children can be awful without fully understanding the scale of their cruelty. I also know parents, teachers, and counselors often prefer the version of events that requires the least intervention. Last autumn, it got bad enough that Sophia begged me not to make her go to school for 2 days. She said she had a stomach bug. She did not. I found her crying on the bathroom floor, holding her phone because someone had posted an edited photo of her in a class group chat. Nothing obscene, nothing criminal, just humiliating enough. Her face widened, her teeth exaggerated, the caption saying she looked like she was about to remind the teacher there was homework. Again, small enough to be dismissed, cumulative enough to eat a child alive. I had meetings. So many meetings. With Thomas, with her homeroom teacher Anja, with Vice Principal Morel. Everybody nodded. Everybody used words like monitor, support, mediation, peer dynamics. Nobody ever seemed willing to name what was happening plainly, because Once you call something bullying, you have to do something uncomfortable about it. Things improved a bit after Christmas, or at least they became less visible. Sophia started talking about a girl called Elodie from another form who was nice to her in art. She stopped asking to stay home so often. She even laughed more. So when the Prague trip came up, I told myself maybe this was a chance for her to feel included. Maybe I was the one who needed to let go a little. That is what I thought until the practical information packet came out. 48 children, 3 nights abroad, 2 teachers and 1 supporting parent volunteer who turned out to be Petra, the mother of one of the most socially powerful girls in the year. 6 girls to a room, 4 boys to a room, teachers on a different floor because room distribution in the hotel requires flexibility, curfew at 20:30, lights out at 20:30 OD, room checks are intervals, no mention of which adult would be responsible if a child had a panic attack, got sick, or had a problem with roommates at midnight. No indication that room assignments could be changed after finalization. Long stretches of supervised free time, which to me sounded suspiciously like adolescents loosely clustered in a foreign city while adults hoped for the best. I emailed Anja the same day. I asked who Sophia would be rooming with and whether there was any possibility of ensuring she was not placed with girls who had previously targeted her. I tried to be measured. I didn't accuse. I referenced our earlier meetings. I said I was asking in the interest of making the trip a positive experience for everyone. Anja replied 2 days later with one of those maddeningly cheerful emails teachers seem trained to write. She said rooming decisions were being made with care. She said adolescents sometimes benefit from being gently encouraged to broaden their social comfort zones. She said she would keep my concerns in mind. That phrase alone made my jaw clench. A week later, Sophia came home glowing because the rooming lists were apparently basically done, though not officially announced. She told me she would probably be with Clara, Ain's Ruse, a girl named Nika, and maybe Elodie if there was enough space. I remember just staring at her. I asked why she was smiling if she knew those girls had made her miserable. She shrugged in that teenage way that is meant to look careless, but is actually pure fear. She said it would be fine. She said everyone had moved on. She said if she made a fuss now, she would look pathetic. Then she said the sentence that broke my heart a little. If I stay home, they'll talk about me for months. If I go, at least I have a chance. Children say things like that, and suddenly you understand how much social humiliation can feel like physical danger to them. I emailed again, more firmly. I asked for confirmation that Sophia would not be assigned to a room with Clara Wines or Ruse. This time I got a phone call from Anja instead of an email, which is never a good sign. Anja sounded tired before I had even said hello. She told me the school could not facilitate social engineering around every friendship issue. I said I was not talking about friendship issues but documented incidents involving repeated humiliation. She said those incidents had been dressed internally. I asked if she would be comfortable sleeping a 13-year-old girl in a room with people who had mocked and isolated her for months. She gave a small laugh, not cruel but dismissive, and said, "Mrs. D. Smet, if we separated every pair of girls who had a conflict, nobody would ever leave Belgium." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was clever, because it revealed exactly how little adults sometimes want to see. I spoke to Lucas that evening. Huge mistake. He said I was spiraling. He said Sophia needed confidence, not another reason to think the world was unsafe. He said if I kept intervening every time another child was unpleasant, she would never learn resilience. I asked him how much he knew about the group chat incidents, the edited photo, the way she cried in the bathroom because she thought everyone at school secretly hated her. He said, and I can still hear it, teen girls are vicious. They all survive it. There is a kind of sentence people say only because they are not the one who has to watch the surviving happen. He also told me more than once that I had become controlling since the divorce, that I wanted to manage every variable because I could not manage my own life. When people know where your soft spots are, they press there without even looking. For a few days, I doubted myself. Truly, I lay awake thinking maybe I was turning Sophia into the sort of child who asks permission to breathe. Maybe I was projecting my own fears onto her. When I was 14 and living near Le G, I went on a school trip to Cologne. Nothing criminal happened to me, but something happened that shaped me more than I like to admit. 2 girls decided I was embarrassing because I snored. They put toothpaste in my hair while I slept. The teacher laughed when I reported it because girls can be silly on trips. I spent the rest of that weekend pretending I had a migraine so I could stay near adults. I remember the taste of shame more clearly than most happy memories from that year. I have always known how quickly a trip adults call educational can become a trapped little universe for a child with no safe exit. I tried not to let that history drive me. I really did. Then, 3 days before the final payment deadline, everything shifted. Sophia was in the shower and her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I am not proud of what happened next, but I am not going to lie either. I saw a preview from a group chat with several girls from her class. One message from Clara read, "If she starts crying in Prague, I swear I'll jump in the Vltava." Another from Rus, "No, let her come. It'll be funny." I froze. Parents are always told to respect privacy, build trust, avoid snooping. And in a good world, yes, in a good world, I would have put the phone down and waited for my daughter to come out with wet hair and ask what was for dinner. But something in me already knew. I picked up the phone. The chat was called Prague Girlies, which was so ordinary it made the ugliness inside it worse. There were messages about outfits, snacks, who fancied which boy, who might smuggle vodka minis in shampoo bottles. There were also jokes about rooming, jokes about Sophia. Clara said Sophia would either tell the teachers everything or have a full mental breakdown over someone borrowing her charger. Ein suggested hiding her passport. As a social experiment, Ruse wrote, "Imagine if she sleep talks, I'm recording it." Nika, to my disappointment, sent a laughing emoji. Then one message from a number I later realized was Petra's daughter said, "Her mum will probably email the embassy before we even leave." There it was. Not just mockery of Sophia, but mockery of me. Mockery of the fact that I was trying to protect her. The worst part was Sophia's silence in the chat. She was in it. She had seen it. She had not responded. I did not confront her immediately. I wish I could say that was wisdom, but really it was because I felt sick. When she came into the kitchen, I looked at her and understood in one painful flash exactly what was happening. She wanted to go so badly that she was willing to sit quietly while other girls joked about humiliating her because exclusion felt worse than submission. She had decided that being the target inside the group was better than being outside it. I asked her, as calmly as I could, how the room's situation was looking. She gave me a little shrug and said, "Fine." I asked if she was sure. She said, "Please don't start." Then she saw my face and knew something was wrong. What followed was one of the worst conversations I have ever had with my child. At first she denied everything. Then she said I should not have looked. Then she burst into tears and yelled that I had ruined everything. She said those messages were not even that bad. She said if I made an issue of it now, the girls would know she had shown me even though she hadn't. She said I did not understand what it was like to be 13 now, as if 13 has changed so much that humiliation became harmless. I said I understood enough to know I was not sending her on a multi-day trip to a foreign city to sleep in a room with people discussing whether to hide her passport for entertainment. She said, "They joke like that about everyone?" I said, "Do you joke like that about them?" She went very quiet. Then she whispered, "If I don't go, it will be worse." That sentence has lived in my head ever since. The next morning, I requested an urgent meeting with Anja and Morel. I printed screenshots because at that point I no longer trusted memory or summaries or context. I wanted adults to look directly at the words and then tell me I was overreacting. Thomas the counselor joined as well, which already annoyed me because it meant the school knew this was not trivial. We sat in a small office with a fake plant on the windowsill and a bowl of wrapped sweets nobody ever eats. I slid the printed screenshots across the table. Anja read them first. Her expression changed, but only slightly. Morel read them next and pressed her lips together. Thomas did that professional nodding thing that makes me want to leave rooms. I asked one simple question: would Sophia be moved to a different room with girls she trusted? And after all that, after clear evidence, after prior meetings, after every earlier warning, the answer was still basically no. Not exactly no, because schools almost never say no in plain language when yes would create legal risk. Morel said room assignments were already balanced according to multiple pastoral considerations. Anja said a last-minute reshuffle could inflame the social atmosphere. Thomas said it might single Sophia out further. I asked what was more singling out than making a child sleep in a room with people pointing to record her or hiding essential documents. He said teenagers say outrageous things online that they do not mean literally. I asked if they were prepared to guarantee her safety. Silence. Then Morel said, with that administrative calm that makes your blood boil, no school can guarantee any child's experience minute by minute. I said, then you understand why I cannot sign this? Anja looked almost irritated by that point. She said, Helena, with respect, if Sophia sees you panic every time there is pure conflict, she will internalize that the answer to discomfort is withdrawal. That was when I stopped trying to be liked. I said this was not discomfort. This was a child being expected to remain cheerful while embedded with people who had already shown contempt for her. I said the school's job was not to run a social experiment in Prague and hope she emerged stronger. I said if they could not offer a simple room change after everything they had seen, then I would withdraw her myself. Morel immediately shifted tone and reminded me that the payment was non-refundable after the following morning. That detail, more than anything else, made me realize how much institutional convenience was driving this, not child welfare, logistics, payments, room blocks, schedules, ease. I withdrew her anyway. When I told Sophia that evening, she looked at me as if I had reached into her chest and crushed something by hand. There are moments in parenting that no one can prepare you for, and one of them is the first time your child looks at you with adult-level hatred. Not childish anger, not you're mean because you said no to ice cream. I mean real betrayal. She stood in the hallway with one trainer half on, one half off, and said, I will never forgive you for this. I thought she was being dramatic. Then I saw she meant it, at least in that moment. She cried, screamed, shoved past me, locked herself in her room, and texted Lucas before I had even sat down. He called within minutes and accused me of making unilateral decisions. I said I had spent weeks asking the school for basic safeguards. He said I was humiliating Sophia publicly. He said if I was so terrified, I could have just told her not to go instead of dragging the school into it. I reminded him he had been invited into every conversation and had chosen to dismiss them until a decision was required. Then he said he would take her himself if necessary. That blew the whole thing open because now it wasn't only school drama, it became a custody fight. I told him if he wanted to override me, he could explain to a judge why he believed placing our daughter in a room with girls joking about hiding her passport was good parenting. He went silent. Then he said, in a low voice, you always do this. You always make everything bigger so you can win. That is another thing people do when they don't want to confront facts. They turn your persistence into pathology. Words spread fast because schools are villages with buildings. By the next afternoon, I had already received 2 weirdly sympathetic messages from other mothers, the kind that are written like support but smell of gossip. One said she had heard there was an incident. Another said she understood how anxious these transitions can make some parents. I wanted to throw my phone into the canal. At school, according to Sophia, everyone knew she had been pulled from the trip because her mother was psycho. Clara apparently asked in front of others whether Sophia needed a risk assessment to go to the bakery. Ruth said something about me fitting her with a tracking collar. Even Elodie, the girl Sophia had liked, went quiet around her because adolescents are cowards when popularity is on the line. The night before departure, Sophia packed anyway. I did not know she had done it until I opened her bedroom door and saw the suitcase standing there by the desk, zipped ready. That image nearly broke me. She had folded her jumpers, charged her power bank, tucked in a little bottle of the perfume her aunt had given her for Christmas. She had prepared as if hope itself might force reality to rearrange. She looked at me and said, very calmly this time, Dad says if I come to his flat at 6, he'll drive me. I sat on the edge of her bed because my knees suddenly felt weak. I told her if Lucas tried that, I would stop it. She said she was not a prisoner. I said no, but she was 13, and 13-year-olds are allowed to hate decisions that keep them safe. She laughed in this horrible, brittle way and asked, safe from what? Mean girls? Welcome to school? I wanted to tell her that cruelty normalized is still cruelty, that the world is full of women who spent years shrinking themselves because adults told them to be easier, quieter, less affected, that there is no medal later in life for enduring humiliation silently at 13. But when your child is crying because all she can see is the immediate disaster, her friends leaving without her, the photos, the jokes, the exclusion, you sound abstract and useless talking like that. So I said the only true thing I had left. I said, Safe from being trapped with people who have already shown you exactly who they are? She turned her face to the wall and did not speak to me for the rest of the night. Departure morning was one of the ugliest scenes I have ever lived through. Sophia got dressed before dawn and sat in the kitchen in her coat, not looking at me, as if by simply being ready she could force me to break. Her suitcase stood by the door. My own coffee went cold untouched. At 6:12, Lucas rang the bell. He came in like he was entering a courtroom he intended to win. Sophia stood up instantly. I stepped between them. I said if he walked out with her, I would treat it as a breach of custody. He said, "Over a school trip? You have lost your mind?" I said maybe, but I was still her mother. Sophia started crying again, then shouting, then begging him to take her. He put a hand on her shoulder. I hated him in that moment in a way that had nothing to do with our divorce and everything to do with the fact that he got to play rescuer, because I was willing to carry the blame. He asked Sophia to wait in the hallway and then lowered his voice and told me this was about my need for control, not her welfare. He said if I kept this up, she would leave me emotionally long before she turned 18. I told him maybe, but at least she would do it alive, with her passport, and with nobody filming her in a foreign hotel room for sport. That shut him up for maybe 2 seconds. Then he said I was being hysterical. I opened the screenshots on my phone and held them out. He skimmed them jaw tight, but instead of admitting anything, he said, "Teenagers say stupid things." I said, and adults are supposed to notice when stupid becomes unsafe. In the end, he left without her, mostly because he knew I was serious about taking it further legally if he forced it. Sophia heard the front door close and slid down the hallway wall sobbing in a way I had not heard since she was little. Not tidy tears. The kind that come from somewhere primal, somewhere abandoned. I sat on the floor a few feet away because she would not let me touch her. That was 2 weeks ago. She still speaks to me only when required, mostly one-word answers. Sometimes not even that. With Lucas she is warmer, of course, because he became the parent who almost said yes. He takes her side performatively now, asking if she wants to get out of mom's prison for the weekend, which I know is petty, and I know he says it because he wants to hurt me through her. It is working. At school, I have become a story. I can feel it in the way some parents smile too brightly. I can feel it in the silence when I walk up to a group at pickup. Petra, the volunteer mother who went on the trip, looked straight through me last week outside the gate. That alone would not matter, except Sophia saw it too. The sickest part is that on the second night of the trip, one of the girls, not even from Sophia's class, but from the parallel form, ended up in a clinic after drinking in a hotel room. Not life-threatening, thank God, but enough that parents were informed in a very bland school email about a medical situation handled appropriately by staff. Another rumor, which I cannot confirm fully, is that 2 girls were found wandering the corridor after midnight trying to get into the boys' rooms. Somebody's charger was stolen. Someone else had money taken from a purse. In other words, exactly the kind of chaos adults call unfortunate but normal, and which suddenly becomes less normal when it is your child crying in the middle of it with nowhere to go. And still, that does not make me feel victorious. It doesn't even make me feel right in a satisfying way, because the truth is, being right about risk is a miserable reward when your daughter thinks you destroyed the most important event of her year. I keep replaying every possible alternative. Could I have pushed for the room change earlier? Could I have let her go with a secret agreement that I would drive to Prague if she called? Could I have spoken to the parents of Clara or Inns directly, though I suspect that would only have armed them faster? Could I have swallowed my pride and accepted that maybe she needed to learn this lesson herself? I don't know. I truly don't. People like clean moral stories, but parenting mostly feels like choosing which pain your child will accuse you of causing later. A few nights ago, I found Sophia asleep with the Prague booklet still on her desk. She had scribbled little stars beside the places she had wanted to see: the astronomical clock, Charles Bridge, a bakery near the square Anja had mentioned in class. That hurt more than the shouting did. Anger is hot and loud. Disappointment sits quietly in a room and waits for you to notice it. I stood there for a long time thinking about what children owe us versus what we owe them. We expect them to trust us before they understand us. We ask them to believe that a humiliation avoided can matter more than an experience missed. We make calls with incomplete information and then pretend certainty so they will feel steadier. And sometimes we know even while we are doing it that they may remember the wound more clearly than the protection. I did not stop her from going because I think the world is too dangerous for girls. I stopped her because I think adults too often decide danger only counts once blood is visible. I stopped her because I watched my daughter slowly accept mistreatment as the price of belonging, and I could not cooperate with that lesson by zipping up her suitcase and smiling for the departure photo. I stopped her because every instinct in me said that if something happened in that hotel room, something small, something the school would later describe as complicated, regrettable, impossible to predict, I would never forgive myself for having seen the signs and choosing convenience anyway. Maybe I overdid it. Maybe I turned a bad but survivable social situation into a family fracture that will take months to heal. Maybe Sophia would have come home tired, annoyed, and absolutely fine with 30 photos and 3 new inside jokes and proof that I should have let go. That possibility is what keeps me awake, not because it means I was malicious, but because it means motherhood sometimes requires acting before certainty exists, and the punishment for getting it wrong is written on your child's face. But if I am honest, really honest, if you put me back in that kitchen with the suitcase by the door, the screenshots on my phone, the school shrugging, my ex minimizing, and my daughter willing to endure anything rather than be excluded, I think I would still do the same thing. And that is what makes this so lonely.